Today I'm just third. I have a solo show coming up there. So I'm working on this big behemoth painting. It's like 7 feet by 5 feet. Just trying out the streaming as an option. Since I paint all day anyway, thought I might as well stream it. But yeah, lately I've been working on these big kind of historical paintings, looking at Peter Saul. If you don't know Peter Saul, he's good for ripping off like compositions. Feel free to ask me any questions. I can answer them while I'm painting. Intermittently go and look. Yeah, I can show you what I'm working on. This is what the whole painting looks like so far. I just have the main composition roughed in. I need to get some sort of device that I can just like wear this thing, and you can see what I'm working on better. Maybe just a chair. Like I said, I'm still figuring out how to use the streaming. This is my first attempt. So these are paintings from these are my paintings that I do. So I thought I could have some studio hours since I'm painting anyway, and if people had questions, you can ask me something. These are oils. And yeah, I will back up occasionally, but I kind of want to have people be able to see how I work the brush. The underpainting, this is all acrylic, and then I paint on top of it with oils. Basically, I'm just looking at muscles. So in this stage of the painting, I just need to build up a lot of like meat. And I'm gonna have to like paint like a maniac for the next few months because I have 2 shows coming up. And I don't have enough work yet. I like to paint with no distractions sometimes. So remember, you can feel free to ask me anything. Imagine with everything on YouTube, it's difficult to slow down and watch something like somebody painting, but I know some people into like ASMR videos like this sort of thing. But yeah, I like to talk and paint. Sometimes my brain wants to only use one side, so my speech gets a little slow if I have to get into a certain area, but lately I've been looking at the Chicago Imagists. If any of you guys have heard of them, they're a pretty interesting group. They're a group of pop artists from Chicago, mainly. Ed Paschke, Gladys Nilsson, Jim Nutt, all these different people. And they created a group called the Monster Roster, or the Chicago Imagists, they were also called. And they're also referred to as the Harry Who. There's some distinctions between each group. But they were a group of artists who pulled more from pop culture, comic books, this sort of stuff. So when we think of when we think of pop art, often in these very boring subjects, because his subjects were about boredom in a way. So, with the Harry Who, or the Chicago Imagists, whatever you want to call them, they sourced more of their stuff from pop culture and like comic books. And when we think about comic books, they're actually a lot more personal. You know, they connect to our personal stories more. So they're kind of known for being just in general more personal. Have a different type of connection to pop art and illustration and these sort of things. But yeah, you have to remember back then there was still a distinction between, you know, the highbrow art world and the lowbrow art world. And I just learned the other day that Robert Williams, he's the guy, he made that magazine called Juxtapose. And he had a pretty interesting life. His dad owned a drive-in, so he was always around car culture, like old hot rods and stuff like that. And from that culture came a lot of illustration, you know, types of illustrations you'd see on race cars, that sort of thing. And he created a magazine called Juxtapose, and he also had a book. I can't remember the name of the book, but there was lowbrow in the title. So they talk about highbrow art and lowbrow art. And basically, lowbrow art were things like comic books, things that, you know, they weren't considered to be real art. And then he made this magazine Juxtapose that was showcasing a lot of this stuff. There was also a lot of other, you know, underground comics, people like R. Crumb in the 60s, focusing on this sort of stuff too. His own magazine, there was kind of like an underground magazine boom for a little bit. And people started really liking this magazine. It was basically blending the highbrow art world with the lowbrow art world. He would make these paintings, Robert Williams, he would make these paintings called super cartoons. And so they were kind of like cartoon characters, which were huge. And they were all painted in oils on canvas. And of course, when we think of oils and canvas, we kind of think of that being synonymous with real art making. If you're making something with oils, it must be real, right? But they take him a long time to make. Take him a really long time to make. You know, I think he was only making like 4 or 5 a year, and he sold them all. So he was like, I gotta paint faster. These things take too long. So he kind of had to prove himself early on. But he invented a bunch of characters. Monster Roster are kind of, you know, predecessors to this juxtaposed world in a way. Carl Worstham is another one, another artist. I actually studied with Gladys Nilsson in Chicago, and she's a well-known, she was married to Jim Nutt. If you want to see some interesting portraits, Google out Jim Nutt. He's got interesting stuff going on. What else have I learned lately in painting? George Gross. I've been looking at expressionists. He's got an interesting story. So George Gross, he's a German expressionist. A lot of people from that era you could see that they definitely went through a lot, and it changed their work as well. Otto Dix, he's another interesting one to look at. He fought in World War I, and before he went to war, he was painting a lot of his landscapes. You can actually see his landscapes. I went and visited him in Dresden. They have a museum there called the New Masters Museum. And he went to war, saw the horrors of war, and he just made all these really brutal war paintings when the war was over. And you can actually see, his landscapes on one side of the wall in Dresden, and then you can see his more brutal, horrific paintings on the other wall. Other than that, I've been reading about kind of imaginary religions, speculative fiction. Basically, what speculative fiction is, as Margaret Atwood said, speculative fiction is science fiction without Martians. So it's kind of taking the real world and making stuff up with the real world that could be probable, however unlikely, but Handmaid's Tale is so you can imagine how we can actually learn stuff from taking a look at these kind of seemingly impossible situations. But some of it we can relate back to our lives. Stephen King does a lot of speculative fiction. Seems kind of real, magic realism would be another term. For this type of thing. So in a lot of my paintings, I'm kind of creating the same sort of speculative fiction world. Feel free to ask me any questions. I can just do this every once in a while, and I'll call it, like studio hours. To give in the time on painting. You can rush it, but a lot of painting is a game where you just have to wait it out. It takes time. Oh wow. So I will check out Dan Nelson. Hola. I don't know why So sorry if there's a delay. So the way I start these off is I usually start with some sort of composition. And then from there, I go in with acrylics and, bust in the main big areas. Now I'm just working on some muscles. Working on muscles. Some fibrous muscles. Been spending my evenings just reading and making flashcards for myself, which I know doesn't sound that exciting. But I've been enjoying it. There's a app called Anki Droid. ANKI Droid. And you can make up your own flashcards with it. Basically just has a front side and a back side. So no matter what you're studying, if you're trying to learn how to paint, if you want to know more about artists, a lot of times you read stuff and then you forget it. But with this app, I've been able to just, if I learn something new, I'll just make a flashcard of it. And then every once in a while, you can just go through your flashcards, and it's a pretty simple way to learn a lot about a subject. Memorized about a certain subject or a certain artist. You're already starting to get a good grasp of what they were doing. Hello to Chile. Wish I spoke Spanish. I do speak Czech. I could speak Czech if you need, but můžu mluvit česky, jestli chceš. Ale asi nikdo to mi nerozumí. Yeah, they say in Czech, I'm sure it's translated into other languages as well. I just never really heard it in English. But they say in Czech, you are as many languages as you speak. It can be kind of true, how you express yourself differently in different languages. I was thinking maybe if I have enough videos uploaded of me painting, then some robotic AI, some robotic hand can look at my paintings and learn how to paint from them. Or learn to paint like me, so I can keep making paintings forever. No, I don't want to keep making paintings forever. That's kind of the point, isn't it? To not be able to make them forever. There's only one
Painting is a pretty weird choice of what to do because we can make images with a lot of different things. Especially now we can make images with our phone or our tablet very simply. But for some reason, painting keeps holding on, even though it's probably the most primitive way we can possibly make a mark. It's still not going away. Just making some more of these muscles in here. Trying to learn how to leave certain areas alone because I just have a tendency to keep adding to my paintings. Like, oh, it just needs more stuff. That'll fix it. Just add more stuff. This is still in the baby stages, this one. Maybe if we stick around, we can watch it develop, envelop. I was reading about homunculus. It was this idea. People actually used to think that they came from miniature versions of themselves. So it wasn't like we were a bunch of cells inside of our mother's womb, but we were instead like a mini version of ourselves. Now we think of the embryo and all these different stages. Is an embryo a person? Right? But with that aside, it wasn't until a few hundred years ago that we came up with this idea of epigenesis, which was basically the idea that we're made from blobs of stuff. Like when the first amino acids started turning into, what did they turn into first? Like amoeba-like creatures, probably not even amoeba-like creatures. They're probably like, I don't know. What the heck are they called? I could look it up, but I'd have to take my gloves off. Anyway, epigenesis is the idea that we come from like little bits and pieces of stuff, blobs that form into different things, which is, quite different than the idea of the homunculus. And that was the idea. We're just miniatures. There's a miniature me inside of my mommy. Am I even still on the thing? No, I'm getting off. Alright. I don't know, write and tell me what you think about these live streams. What do you guys think of the live stream? Ask me a question about anything. It can be dangerous to ask on the internet. Yeah, why we still paint. I'd say one reason why we still paint is because of color. We can work with screens, and those are very accurate. And you can put a screen on your wall if you want to. But there's something about the glowing screen that even though, those wall screen things aren't very expensive, people still like paint. And you still get a pretty strong effect just with pigments. Pigments are pretty much just rocks mixed with a binder, oil. That's what I'm using. Of course, later they would make acrylic. But essentially, you just got a little stick. Originally, a lot of brushes would be made of hog's hair. So they even had these animal brushes. This is synthetic, probably plastic of some sort. Who knows if that's better or worse for vegetarian or vegans. I'm actually vegetarian. What's that joke? How do you know if somebody's a vegetarian? And they'll tell you. But no, I actually grew up hunting. But my body would not process meat. Even from a young age, I had trouble with it. Kept trying and trying and trying. I'd like to eat meat. Whenever people hear that, they're like, no, why would you want to? And it's like, well, because everyone says it's really good. It's making these little muscle tendrils. You can see with the paint, I don't want it to be too... Painting's kind of weird like that, because somebody who teaches painting as well, students can watch you do something, and then they try it, and then it doesn't work, the way you did it, and they get frustrated. They're like, why, you made it you just moved the brush. And I think a lot of it's just muscle memory and getting used to, how hard you have to push the brush. Using your arm, a lot of people want to draw like this. So even using your arm to paint rather than your hand is a bit of a shift, if you start writing with your left hand in a way that you're not used to, or writing with your right hand upside down or something. You know what it should look like, but your brain's just not used to it. So it's just practice like everything else. Shooting a basketball, playing the piano. Just got to put in the hours. Feel free to ask me any questions that you're having. I have been checking periodically. How long have I been painting now? 40 minutes. Let's go for an hour. See what happens. My grandma was a painter as well, and a very serious one, and everyone kind of took her work very seriously, even though she was from... A lot of people are from those types of communities. But even though she was from this very rural area, she was so good at painting that people kind of had to, I don't know, and she painted people from her community too. Never went to school a day in her life. She had this big house down in Kansas. Anyone from Europe, when they hear Kansas, they're just like, that's a Wizard of Oz. And it was kind of Wizard of Oz. She had this big house in Kansas full of paintings, just overflowing with paintings. Thousands. And painting's kind of weird like that because, what do you do? What do you do with thousands of paintings? You can't, they're so special to people that kind of no matter what, if somebody finds an original painting, if it's at a thrift store or whatever, if they find an original painting, it's kind of, they think of it as something valuable. Even paintings done by, people that taught themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. My studio gets hot every day around now. Which is annoying, but a day in the studio is a good day, right? Any day in the studio is a good day. Studios are weird places. A lot of people would, there's a book by James Elkins called What Painting Is. And it's all about painting and painting's relationship to alchemy. And when we think about alchemy, what are the goals of alchemy? Are gnosis, which I think just means knowledge, immortality, and turning lead into gold. When you kind of think about those things, it's kind of what painting's doing in a way. You're trying to an idea. You might not see him at first. Sometimes you see him very simply with history painting and paintings of Jesus and stuff like that. The idea is very easy and at the forefront. But even paintings about landscapes, there's ideas. How you paint the landscape. There's a lot of artists in the U.S. like Thomas Church. What are some of their other names? Well, in Germany it would have been like Caspar David Friedrich. And there was this romanticism going on in Europe that strongly equated the landscape with, being God's land. So the landscape was always painted in a way that reflected this idea of it being God's land. So the way our culture makes us see the world, sometimes we don't see these messages that are right in front of our faces. Maybe somebody who had to live in a more difficult situation dealing with the elements wouldn't necessarily regard the landscape and the earth as being this beautiful place, but rather place. No questions from anybody? Just keep on trucking. R. Crumb's famous line, keep on trucking. It's called Crumb. You might be able to find it online somewhere. But he was a comic book artist in the 60s. He created Zap Comics and Weirdo magazine. But he said, you know, that whole thing, keep on trucking, that was caused nothing but like legal headaches for him. Because all of a sudden everybody wanted to start using it, and it ended up on truck mud flaps. And the images he was painting, he actually was his dad was a very strict man who wrote a book called How to Train People Effectively. And so you can imagine having 3 sons who are all kind of, let's say, different than the rest of society. For a guy in the military who wrote a book called How to Train People Effectively and end up with these 3 artist sons was not exactly a loving relationship. But yeah, that documentary was pretty influential on me when I first saw it. I think it came out in like 94, but I saw it later. I think I saw it at the end of the 90s. And he actually ends up trading just a stack of sketchbooks, 6 sketchbooks full of work, you know, from this 1960s point in his life, probably a very important turning point in his artistic career. He ends up trading a stack of those sketchbooks for a house in southern France, where he still lives to this day. He's an interesting guy. He actually he did a comic book of Genesis in the Bible, which is pretty Genesis. And he's known for he can have kind of explicit imagery. And violent imagery, but then again, you know, there's sex and violence in Genesis too. So it's kind of interesting to read the book and think about it with the actual text. But yeah, I don't think he went to a day of school in his life either. Totally self-taught. A lot of it's just practice, you know, just keep practicing, keep on trucking, like I said. I think it's healthy to also bring painting into other areas of your life. Like, you might not think about it, but how much time do you spend a day watching TV? Not that I watch TV sometimes too. I have the TV on a lot. That's why I like to sometimes just be totally quiet paint focus in different ways on what I'm doing. But if that's too much of a shock for you, you can just turn on a podcast or listen to me ramble on for an hour. And from that, you just kind of tune out the actual painting in a way can be helpful sometimes too. Have useful distractions of some sort. So we got 8 more minutes and I'm signing off. So if you got any questions, hit me up. Let me know what you think of this format. It's not like videos, but I just have to work on so much of my own painting right now. I don't have time to do that because I've got I've got a solo show coming up in 2 months. Yikes. In Denver, and then I have another show at a museum coming up at the same time. So I just don't have time to work on stuff that's not directly my main work. Just not happening. Is painting these kind of muscle-like tendrils. I like the idea of tendrils stretching out, like rhizomes going underneath the ground and trying to find new places to grow. It's actually a type of research called rhizomatic research, which is the idea that you can research from a lot of different starting points, so to speak. So I could research biology, I could research all these different things at once. And create something new from all that research. Are you just kind of making stuff up? Yes. When you do that kind of research. Way to talk about it. It's all the rage, I'm sure, in early education. How to foster lateral thinking. That means thinking across instead of just thinking up. So when you have an idea, sometimes you have to go somewhere completely unrelated to that idea to get a new solution. That's lateral thinking. And it's also, the heart of creativity. And what that means too. What's it actually mean for somebody to be creative? Can creativity be taught? It's kind of hard to say. Can creativity be taught? How do you teach somebody to be creative? Well, generally, you get them to use some sort of lateral thinking. Thinking across the idea. take a break. I'm excited about this first studio hours, I should start calling them. Got a little section done there. Still a lot more to go. A lot more to go. But I'm gonna make it. You never know. These paintings take a lot of time. Big paintings take a lot of time. You can see these other paintings I'm working on here. These cutout paintings. They're all like cut out of pieces of wood, individually painted. Then here is some more work. Bunch of books. Look at those books. Read books. It's my fish Doke. Hey Doke. Hey Doke. Hello. And then here is, thank you for saying it's looking cool. There's another one. And these are pretty funny. Making these paintings that you can actually, it's just Velcro. So I make this big background. Then you can kind of like put this guy in different ways, which is kind of fun. Now he's like walking up. And this is kind of like a portrait piece, some sort of future technological bioengineered creature. But yeah, make paintings. Thanks for watching, sticking around. Nice little plant, planting it up. Well, I don't know, I'm leery of setting goals right now, but as easy as this was to stream, I think I'll be doing more of it in the future. So, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Nice, Dolly's house and museum. That would be awesome to see. That'd be super cool. Lucky you.